ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is a disorder in which those who have it have difficulty in maintaining focus and keeping still due to hyperactivity. This results in difficulty going about normal everyday activities as the disorder inhibits normal functions. Around 6.4 million children in the United States have been diagnosed with ADHD. Males are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than females. Twin studies indicate that the disorder is often inherited from the person's parents, with genetics determining about 75% of cases in children and 35% to potentially 75% of cases in adults. Environmental factors such as tobacco smoke during pregnancy can cause problems with central nervous system development and can increase the risk of ADHD. ADHD is associated with functional impairments in some of the brain's neurotransmitter systems, particularly those involving dopamine and norepinephrine. Around 12 genes and their variations are said to have an impact on acquiring the traits of ADHD. Most genes associated with ADHD are located within the brain, such as the DRD4 gene. This gene is a protein-coding gene responsible for neuronal signaling in the mesolimbic system of the brain, an area of the brain that regulates emotion and complex behavior. Variations of it play a role in acquiring ADHD. Its relation to behavior specifically ties it to its effects and reasoning for the relation to ADHD. Another gene example is DRD5, yet another subtype of the dopamine receptor gene. This gene is another protein-coding gene responsible for stimulating adenylyl cyclase. This receptor is expressed in neurons in the limbic regions of the brain.
The design of our SNP chip was pretty hard to come up with. ADHD is really hard to pinpoint in an individual, thus making testing relatively difficult. The problem with ADHD research is that there's not much of it, so information on what SNPs are related is very low. However, some key SNPs that may carry an association with attention deficit hyperactive disorder are those located in the genes such as BAIAP2, SNP25, DBH, COMT, etc. In our test that we conduct, we may want to create a SNP chip that scans around 5 to 10 different gene variations, including some like the SNP RS8079781 with the CC genotype, since that mutation is known to increase risk for ADHD. The SNP affects the gene BAIAP2, which is an insulin receptor protein that helps conduct certain information to and from the brain. Based on numerous studies, the mutation of this gene, which usually has the genotype TT, has been one of the main contributors to people with ADHD, but is not known if it is actually associated with the disorder. However, some research does show that those with the TT genotype may have a 0.8% less risk of developing adult ADHD. Another variation we can test for is the SNP RS4680 with the GG genotype and the COMT gene, which is also a good candidate for detecting risk of ADHD. The COMT gene is responsible for 2 main things: hormones and the prefrontal cortex. In particular to our disorder, the prefrontal cortex is a main area where ADHD attacks. The COMT gene is responsible for controlling the production of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. A mutation of these SNPs in this gene may cause thinking, behaviors, emotions, and memory to be slightly affected, a common thing seen in those with ADHD. These SNPs, combined with a few more that test for related things, will be key in determining who is likely to be more susceptible or at a higher risk for having attention deficit hyperactive disorder. That being said, if Bill Richardson were to take our test now, he could hopefully determine whether or not he has a chance of being affected by ADHD. Although the test isn't a direct source in solving the question of does he have it or does he not, because sadly, there's not enough studies that show any one mutation being the main cause of ADHD.
Testing positive for ADHD comes with a certain negative, but it's not entirely something to be considered devastating. It helps to know if one is afflicted by it, so they may seek the proper medication and make a fitting lifestyle adjustment. In testing for the ADHD doesn't necessarily have to be a costly procedure, as some schools offer free evaluations for children.
DNA testing is a viable option for those seeking psychostimulant medications for assisting in combating this disorder, with options such as Adderall and Dexedrine. It is important to go through the testing process to guarantee that medication is needed to help those affected.